The fluorescent lights of the conference room hummed, a sterile counterpoint to the icy silence that had descended. I watched him, my boss, my mentor for the last 5 years, the man who'd promised me the moon and stars during this company's meteoric rise, now looking at me like I was a stain on his expensive suit. His eyes, usually crinkling with geniality, were hard, unreadable. The words, delivered with a practiced, almost apologetic flatness, still echoed. "We're going in a different direction, Sarah. It's just not a fit anymore." A fit. After I'd poured every late night, every weekend, every ounce of my ambition into this company, I was suddenly not a fit. The IPO was weeks away, the culmination of years of grueling work, and I was being unceremoniously ejected. My initial reaction wasn't anger, not even shock. It was a profound, disorienting disconnect. This wasn't the plan. The plan involved celebrating this milestone, seeing my name on the executive roster, finally tasting the fruits of my labor. Instead, I was being handed a severance package that felt insultingly meager, a pat on the back and a swift escort to the exit. The security guard, a man I'd nodded hello to every morning for years, and who usually offered a friendly, albeit brief, smile, now looked at me with a strange mixture of pity and suspicion as he escorted me to my car. My car. A decade-old sedan, parked in the furthest reaches of the employee lot, a stark contrast to the gleaming luxury vehicles of the C-suite, which were invariably nestled in the prime spots closest to the building's entrance. The air outside the building felt suddenly colder, the familiar afternoon sun less reassuring. For the first few days I drifted. The sheer absurdity of it all kept me numb. I replayed conversations in my mind, dissecting every interaction, searching for the precise moment things went so irrevocably wrong. Had I missed a subtle sign in his demeanor during that last quarterly review? Had I perhaps been too assertive in that strategy meeting a few weeks prior? My mind was a relentless whirlwind of hypotheticals, none of which brought any clarity or comfort, just a dull ache of unanswered questions. Friends offered support, their words well-intentioned, full of platitudes about silver linings and new opportunities, but their words felt hollow, distant. They didn't understand the sheer, gut-wrenching betrayal. It wasn't just a job. It was my identity, my validation, my carefully constructed future. The days blurred into an indistinguishable haze of quiet mornings and restless nights. The turning point wasn't a dramatic revelation or a sudden burst of clarity. It was quieter, more insidious, a slow dawning realization that crept in during the aimless hours. I was scrolling through a business news site, idly scanning articles about our company's upcoming IPO, the one I had anticipated with such feverish excitement, when I saw it. A puff piece, detailing the leadership team, the visionary architects behind the projected $2 billion valuation. And there, in a prominent glossy photo, was my boss beaming, his smile radiating success, accompanied by a carefully worded quote about teamwork and shared success. Next to him, his hand resting casually on his shoulder, was the man who had been my direct report for years, the one I'd personally mentored, painstakingly taught every crucial skill to, the one who'd often deferred to my judgment in meetings, seeking my guidance. His name was listed as the new head of my department. My department. The very team I had built, nurtured, and led. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach, tightening with each passing second. It wasn't just about being fired, about being deemed surplus to requirements. It was about being systematically erased. My contributions, my innovative ideas, the countless sleepless nights spent refining strategies and problem-solving, all conveniently overlooked, absorbed into the triumphant narrative of his brilliance, his team's unqualified success. The narrative was already being meticulously written, and I wasn't even a footnote, barely a ghost in their meticulously crafted history. My very existence within the company's trajectory seemed to be actively disappearing from the public record. That evening I sat in my quiet apartment, the silence amplified by the profound absence of office chatter, the usual hum of activity replaced by an unnerving stillness. I thought about the years of being the supportive one, the dependable team player, the one who consistently made sure everyone else's contributions shone, the one who never made waves. I prioritized collaboration above all else, smoothed over interpersonal conflicts, and consistently elevated others, never once realizing I was inadvertently building the ladder for someone else to climb over me, to reach the heights I had aspired to myself. Now, the crushing weight of that realization settled heavily upon me. But surprisingly, why, it wasn't despair that washed over me. It was a quiet, simmering resolve, a spark of something determined and clear-eyed. This wasn't about destruction, it was about a need, a deep-seated imperative, to set the record straight, to reclaim my own narrative. I didn't have a master plan for vengeance, no elaborate scheme for revenge. What I had was access to information, a deep and intimate understanding of the company's inner workings, its inherent vulnerabilities, its projections, not the rosy public-facing ones, but the granular, often uncomfortable details I had meticulously compiled over years of dedicated work. The IPO was a delicate dance, a carefully orchestrated performance for investors, regulators, and the public at large. Any hint of instability, any significant question about the foundations upon which this seemingly solid edifice was built, could be detrimental. It was a fragile ecosystem easily disrupted. The following week, a formal invitation arrived in my inbox. It was for a pre-IPO networking event, the kind of exclusive, hushed gathering I'd always attended, a space where I'd mingled with investors, seasoned analysts, and influential industry leaders. This time, however, my purpose was fundamentally different. I didn't dress in my usual power suit, the one that projected an air of confidence and competence. Instead, I opted for something understated, elegant, designed to blend rather than stand out. I arrived not as a hopeful employee seeking to impress, but as a keen observer, a quiet presence in the room. I circulated, engaging in conversations with familiar faces, listening far more than I spoke. I deliberately avoided seeking out my former boss or his newly elevated protege. Instead, I found myself in a natural conversation with a prominent financial journalist, someone known for their sharp, investigative skills and a reputation for digging beneath the surface. We chatted amiably about the market, the prevailing trends in the tech landscape, and then, almost casually, I steered the conversation towards our company. I didn't fabricate anything, not a single detail. I simply posed questions, carefully worded, designed to elicit specific responses. It's fascinating how quickly they've managed to scale. I'd say my tone thoughtful and genuinely curious. I remember working on the Q3 projections 2 years ago. We encountered significant challenges in achieving those growth targets, particularly in terms of market penetration for the new product line. I wonder how they've managed to overcome those hurdles so effectively, especially given the initial sluggish uptake we observed internally. Or, to a seasoned analyst who had always appreciated detailed insights, the valuation seems incredibly optimistic on the surface. During my tenure, we faced considerable headwinds with supply chain disruptions that significantly impacted our manufacturing timeline. I'm curious to hear your perspective on how they've managed to mitigate those specific risks so effectively for the IPO. I spoke about historical data, about internal metrics I was privy to, about strategic pivots that had been far more of a struggle, far more precarious than the smooth public narrative suggested. I didn't whisper rumors or spread unsubstantiated gossip. I presented observations, framed as genuine curiosity about their remarkable success. The journalist, her eyes now sharp with a growing interest, quietly jotted down notes in her small pad. The analyst's brow furrowed, a subtle crease appearing between his eyes, a sign of contemplation. I was planting seeds of doubt, not through overt accusation, but through nuanced inquiry, by simply shining a light on the inherent complexities and challenges they had so carefully smoothed over for public consumption. I was offering them the raw materials for a more critical examination. Then came the shareholder call, the official, crucial one, where the company leadership presented their final persuasive pitch to potential investors, the culmination of months of preparation. I wasn't invited, of course, but I was listening. I had made sure to tune in. I heard the polished pronouncements, the confident, rehearsed projections. And then I heard the questions from the investors. They were sharper, more probing than usual, a subtle shift in tone from the earlier, more deferential inquiries. One question in particular stood out, echoing the very concerns I had subtly raised. It was about the long-term sustainability of their projected market share growth in the face of increasing competition, and specifically, how the company had definitively addressed the significant logistical challenges that had been documented in early internal reports. Another investor inquired about the long-term viability of the new product line, given the initial market resistance and adoption hurdles that I had subtly alluded to. The responses from the leadership team were, I heard, a little more flustered, aired than rehearsed, a noticeable departure from their meticulously crafted script. There were stumbles, evasions, and a clear lack of the usual seamless, unshakable confidence. The protege, who was tasked with presenting on product development and market strategy, looked distinctly uncomfortable, his usual suave demeanor faltering. My former boss's voice, usually so smooth and reassuring, had a slight, almost imperceptible tremor that betrayed his unease. The carefully constructed facade was beginning to crack under the pressure of genuine scrutiny. The aftermath wasn't immediate fireworks, no dramatic implosion. The IPO went through as planned, but not with the explosive, unprecedented fanfare everyone had anticipated. The stock price opened strong, as was often the case, but then it plateaued and subsequently dipped slightly, a subtle but significant wobble. There were whispers in the financial press, quiet murmurs about cautious investor sentiment, about questions lingering over the company's long-term scalability and the robustness of its foundational projections. The initial triumphant narrative of effortless success had been subtly, yet effectively, complicated. In the following weeks, I heard from former colleagues. Not about my revenge, of course. They wouldn't have known the intricacies of my subtle interventions. But they spoke about the prevailing atmosphere within the company. The initial euphoria of the IPO had been replaced by a more anxious, watchful mood, a pervasive sense of underlying tension. There were internal reviews, a vague but palpable sense that something wasn't quite right, that the smooth sailing of their projections had hit an unexpected patch of rough water, a turbulence they hadn't accounted for. The protégé, I heard through the grapevine, was struggling to maintain the momentum, facing unexpected pushback on his initiatives, his authority now questioned. My former boss, once the picture of untouchable success and unassailable authority, now seemed more beleaguered, his public appearances marked by a defensive tone, his usual confidence diminished. I meanwhile had found a new path. A quieter one, working for a smaller, more focused firm, a place that valued depth over scale. I'd shared my story carefully with the hiring manager. He listened without judgment, his expression thoughtful, impressed by my integrity and my ability to navigate difficult, ethically complex situations with a quiet resilience. The sting of the humiliation of being fired had faded, replaced by a quiet internal satisfaction, a sense of vindication. I had been underestimated, discarded, and overlooked. But in the end, the truth, presented with quiet precision and an understanding of its impact, had found its own voice, and its echoes were proving to be more than enough. The air in my new office was cleaner, the work more meaningful, and my contributions were genuinely valued. I had walked away from the $2 billion dream, and in doing so I had found a more valuable reality, one built on substance rather than superficial success.